Freud was stating in 1900 that we're driven by our sexuality to the extent that even as children we're shaped by our sexual urges. He said we all go through a series of stages: an oral stage when we yearn to suck our mother's breast, an anal stage when we learn to control our bowels, and a phallic stage. Freud said that getting stuck in this anal stage can lead to becoming obsessive, and some Freudians argue that keeping your records in alphabetical order is one sign of having this anal fixation. But surely that depends on how many records you've got. If you've got 2 records and you keep checking they're in alphabetical order, that's obviously a bit mad. But I've got about 2,000 records. I thought I kept them in alphabetical order so I could find the one I wanted, but apparently it means I've got a problem with me arse. The next part of Freud's theory can make us uneasy, because in the modern world you daren't even suggest that there could be a sexuality attached to children. By the time we get to 3, he said, we become fascinated by our own genitals and we learn the pleasures of touching them. Then boys, having seen their mother or a little girl naked, become aware that it's possible to not have a penis, and that disorientates them. I suppose it's like anything when you're a kid. It never occurs to you that other people haven't got the same things as you, and when you find out, it's slightly disturbing. Like when my little boy went round someone else's house and they didn't have Cartoon Network. This phallic stage, said Freud, lasts until about 6 or 7, when we have a bit of a rest from it until we get to puberty and our desires come back. And at that age, our sexuality drives us with a vengeance. In my case, it involved being deeply and obsessively in love with Debbie Harry, Anna Ford, Chris Evert, Polystyrene from X-Ray Specs, Cheryl Jackson from the 4th Year, Anthea Redfern, Susie from Coronation Street, Linda Crump, who lived in a caravan, and Beyond Bald from the back. His ideas of the unconscious led Freud to change his mind about what causes neurosis. The reason we were all susceptible to becoming neurotic, he said, wasn't because we'd been abused as children, but because all men had a primeval desire to kill their fathers and have sex with their mothers. When he first came up with that, I wonder if he thought, when you think about it, it's obvious. Freud named this conflict the Oedipus complex, after the character in the Greek story who does indeed marry his mother and murder his father. But apart from anything else, it sounds impractical, because even if there was an attraction, your mum would ruin it by going, oh, well, all right, but only if you tidy your room first. Freud's view of homosexuality was that it was a product of a child getting stuck in their early stages.
My name is Kenny and I'm a kangaroo, garoo, garoo.
While this meant he saw it as a deviation from a natural path, by saying it was a product of the workings of the mind, he was saying there was no point in trying to ban it or to discourage it. By exploring his ideas of the unconscious, Freud had hit on something that runs through society, that sexuality can be denied or repressed, but it can't be flushed away. And no matter how strict a society might be against teenage sex or homosexuality or sexuality in general, it will still be there, bobbling around in the unconscious, and then it will burst out in a thoroughly mucked up way. For example, my parents were brought up in the relatively prudish 1930s, and the result was that my dad had a screwdriver with a picture of a woman in a swimsuit on the side. But the swimsuit was made of ink, so when he tipped it upside down, the ink would run out, and my dad would go, whoa, hey, and then whenever one of his friends would come round, he'd get the screwdriver out, and they'd both end up going, look at that, there it goes. So the result of all that strict Puritan education about how everybody ought to conform to a biblical sexual code was that my dad was getting turned on by a household tool. And for all I know, whenever I went to bed, he'd slip out to the garage for some hardcore stuff on a chisel. April 1923, he published a paper called The Ego and the Id. As well as being divided between the conscious and the unconscious, he said, our mind is driven by conflicting forces. First of all, there's the id, which simply demands satisfaction for our natural urges. Get me food, get me beer, get me that woman, punch that bloke, I don't know why, just punch him. Then there's the ego, which still demands gratification, but tries to do it in connection with the outside world. It tries to guide the demands of the id in a realistic direction. It's as if the ego says to the id, we all want things, but you've got a box clever. Your trouble, id. Is you a fool to yourself? Then, said Freud, there's another force, the superego, that reacts to ideas and judges whether to behave in a certain way. In effect, the superego sorts out our morality. That's why concepts such as the law are not the most important things to shape our behaviour. For example, if murder was suddenly made legal, we wouldn't all, when we were sat on a train, start stabbing people around us and then go, well, legal, so you might as well. Ideally, the id, ego and superego all maintain a balance, otherwise we go wrong. For example, when you meet someone who used to be a laugh and they say, I'm hoping to go to the Lake District in the summer, and then show you around their house and all their furniture's in alphabetical order, because that way we know where everything is. That's too much superego done that.